Welcome everybody for another strong inspiration interview. We have Dr. Robert White of Alabama State University with us today. He's going to talk about his book. Show us your book, Dr. White. You got it on hand? There you go. Highway 80. We're going to talk about some Highway 80 today. Welcome you again. Strong Inspirations, this is what we do. We find some brothers and sisters around the country who got good Black history stories, who want to share as we want to do, to inspire, to educate, and to entertain you. Hit that subscribe button, and we upload video each week, 1, 2, 3, as we find these type of people. Hit the like button, hit the notifications button, tell people about us, because we're going to do what I like to say, come on strong. So, Dr. White, welcome you for joining us again today.
All right, man. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. Tell us about your book.
Okay, well, the title of the book is Highway 80, A Drive Through Alabama Civil Rights Corridor. And I've taught at Alabama State University for over 25 years. And did a book that highlights Highway 80, US Highway 80, which runs through Alabama. It actually starts in Georgia and ends in Texas, but it slices right down the middle of Alabama through what's called the Black Belt. And the Black Belt was where most of your civil rights history in the South took place or originated from. So we call it a civil rights corridor because all along that highway is nothing but history. And so I got the idea from some friends of mine who are Gullah Geechee, and the Gullah Geechee community is a Maroon African community that's located in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and North Florida. And they mostly inhabited the shoreline and the coastal islands that are close to those states. And so during slavery, they ran away and hid out on those islands. Some of them were shipwrecked out there. Some of them made it out there through different ways. So they maintained a lot of the African culture. Okay. And I was up there visiting with them a couple of years ago, and they had what's called a cultural heritage corridor. It's called the Gullah Geechee Corridor. You can Google it, and it's where the U.S. Park Service has designated that region that runs throughout those states as being a cultural heritage site. So in Alabama, we wrote the book first to build up the history of the place, of the region. And so now it'll be the move of other people to push to have the corridor established officially. But okay. The book highlights what happened in Tuskegee, what happened in Montgomery, what happened in Lowndes County, what happened in Dallas County, Greene County, Sumter County, all of Marengo County, all of those counties that were hotbeds for civil rights activity. And I got some of the top scholars in the country to write different chapters. And so I edited them and, just wrote a couple of chapters myself and, and assisted in other collaborative efforts. And we've got pictures, a lot of pictures people have never seen before, and documents, historical documents in there that are very seldom discussed or seen. So it's a very, I think it's a very detailed work, but it was originally done for my students. It was a textbook. So it's somewhat easy to read. It's got some statistics and those type of things in it for people who are scientists and want to get to the science of personal accounts. People who were there marching with King wrote chapters for it, gave comments, and gave insight. And we're also doing a video documentary on the authors of the book as well. So we've got different, yeah. So we've interviewed several of the foot soldiers. Well, Willie Mukasa Ricks, who was Martin Luther King's bodyguard and SNCC member, and really the one who brought Black Power to the forefront, the term and the phrase, Black Power. And so he wrote that Highway 80 was the bloodiest highway in America. And he had been with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He'd been all over the country, all over the world, actually, traveling with them But man, he said, when he came to Highway 80, he said that was the bloody about organizing with Stokely Carmichael and James Farmer and others, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which became the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in Oakland, California. And so that's an unusual relationship there, because Lowndes County Freedom Organization were the first ones to use the black cat or the Black Panther as an emblem. And they also, the programs of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense were very, very similar. So, you know, we affectionately call the Lowndes County Freedom Organization the Big Panther, and the Little Panther was the one that was in Oakland,
Is that
Oakland and so forth.
right?
But,
That's a little known story.
There is a relation. So that's one of the stories. Another one was told by Annie Pearl Avery, who was also a SNCC member, and she talks about what happens in Mississippi, the Mississippi part, and how after Freedom Summer in Mississippi, they came to Alabama and began to organize voter registration pods and do all types of protest activities, you know, to get the attention of the white power structure. So we've got scholars from mostly from Alabama State University, but Harris Stowe College and FAMU, and we've got a, you know, it's not only an HBCU thing, but it's mostly HBCU scholars writing about topics that they're experts on.
Actually, now when we think about the civil rights and the injustices that happened to us, that's one side of the story. But the other side is how we overcame and succeeded and had some accomplishments. Can you give us a little insight, maybe of example of an accomplishment when they did what they did, we reacted, and how that improved conditions, let's say?
Sure. Well, you know, what you have is you have a narrative of resistance, right? And ever since the slave ships kissed the shores of America, Black people have been resisting, and they've resisted in different ways. Now, the number one way that Black people have resisted that has earned them the outright ire or attack of the oppressor is organization. Whenever you seek to organize, your enemies are going to mobilize, right? That's how you know, the way you know you got an enemy is watch how they respond to your mobilization, your organization, and your strategizing, right? So like you think you may have a cut buddy or a running partner, but when you begin to organize to perform a task, watch how they respond. That determines whether they're with you or not. Well, as long as Africans were organized the way the master wanted, everything was fine. But when the slaves started to organize, and free Africans in the North started to organize schools, a great example is Lincoln Normal School, which started in Marion, Alabama, which is along our route. And that school became Alabama State University. But had it not been for revolutionary Africans from Sierra Leone, that school in Talladega College would have never come so, or would have really struggled, you know, to maintain itself. And so as far as Lincoln Normal School, it was 9 ex-slaves from Marion, Alabama, who understood the relationship between knowledge and freedom. And the school that they started grew, became very controversial in the town, a small stint, because he was the head Negro in charge of Negro education, or so he thought. So when Lincoln Normal School moved to Montgomery, which is right down the street from Tuskegee, and set up shop there, and eventually became Alabama State Teachers College and then Alabama State University. That's a major example of resistance. And wherever the colleges are, you have business to spring up to support the college. So there's a positive relationship between the learning environment and the community. That was reversed, you know, right after Jim Crow. And so people always ask the question, why HBCUs mostly in the hood? You know, why are they in ghettos? You know, why has there not been a transformative nature between the school and the neighborhood that's been around it? Well, that's because the paradigm shifted. And hopefully when we begin to study the civil rights movement as a subject of history and not in light of a social crisis, you know, we only study Black history now, or look at it or make reference to it when somebody's dead, you know, or somebody's mistreated or somebody. But when we use our history to study it as a means of changing our condition, changing our way of thinking, you know, then that's when the wholesale change is going to take place. It's when we properly analog and analyze our history to where we can better make decisions that are in our best interest and not the best interest of other people. So the schools, the businesses that popped up as a result of the schools, the politicians that were elected right after the Civil War in Alabama and in Louisiana and Mississippi and in South Carolina and other places, all of those are testimonies of the ingenuity of African Americans. But at the same time, you also have to discuss how vehement white people were in destroying what Black people kept rebuilding.
I'm sure. Now, like for example, do you talk about the Selma Montgomery March? Is that along Highway 80 in some
Absolutely.
respects?
Absolutely, absolutely. We got myself, Dr. Howard Robinson, and a couple of other people talk about the significance of Selma. But we have interviews of people who were actually there, you know, and so we are blessed to have these people still living with us. So we talk about the Selma to Montgomery March. We talk about the thing that led up to it. And what a lot of people don't know is that the Selma to Montgomery March was started not for voting rights initially, but it was started to protest the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson in Marion, Alabama. Now, this is years after, of course, the founding of Lincoln Normal School. Sure. But Reverend James Orange and C.T. Vivian, who just passed away, Reverend James Orange was one of my mentors in the labor unions, and I met C.T. Vivian a couple of times in Selma, because we have a pilgrimage every year where all the civil rights people come to Selma during the reenactment of Bloody Sunday.
So now this gentleman was killed, right? That's what you're telling me?
Yeah, Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed by a state trooper. He just was tried a couple of years ago for his crime. There was a riot that took place because the whites were going to try to lynch Reverend James Orange, who was locked up in the jail in Marion for organizing Black people. And so they were protesting outside, and the state troopers came, shot the lights out of the street lights, and began to assault the Black people under the cover of darkness. Really? And Jimmy Lee Jackson ran into a store, and he was protecting his mother, who was about to be shot, and he ended up getting shot and killed. Well, they were going to march his dead body in a casket from Selma to Montgomery and dump the body out on the steps of the Capitol. And the SCLC leaders got a hold of what they were about to do and came and kind of co-opted it and turned it into a march for voting rights. So it was not originally a march for voting rights. It was originally a march to protest the police brutality and the unjust actions of the state troopers against Black protesters.
Now, just you going with that story, when they did do the march, and we've heard what happened to like John Lewis and so on and so forth, did that result into some advancements for Black people? I mean, was there some positive outcome of that? I know it eventually did, but maybe on the immediate side?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you see it in this past election. The fruits of this past election actually go back to 1965. Because as a result of the march, the Voting Rights Act was passed, which made states have to pre-clear with the federal government any activity that they have regarding voting, right? Because people were rigging elections, just like this current administration, is claiming. However, it was because of the Voting Rights Act and the spirit of the Voting Rights Act that we've pretty much cleaned up our election process, and you see what happens. Right. Whenever you clean up your election process, you have a maximum number of people turning out, and you also have oftentimes an overthrow of power. Incumbents do not like large voter turnouts because they know they're going to lose, and so those fruit really, I think, have manifested now more than ever. Even though Shelby County versus Holder pretty much gutted the Voting Rights Act, it didn't gut the spirit of the people to continue to organize, being smarter, wiser, more strategic in what they're doing to get the victory that they were looking for. So I would say that this past election is probably the greatest example of how voting rights are important to change things.
Now, the gentleman who was killed, was there any outcome of that? Did people who killed
Yeah,
him face
I mean,
any retribution or anything like that?
yeah, and it was a couple of years ago that they actually were tried and convicted, but they were so old, you know, that it really didn't matter. Just like with the 4 little girls and 2 little boys that were killed in Birmingham, the perpetrators of that were tried and convicted, but they were so old and so, you know, so decrepit that, you know, it was just a symbolic victory, you know. But that's a part of the.
Is there another story, a little known story that happened along Highway 80
Well,
that you can
sure.
share?
Sure. I mean, you've had the death of Jonathan Daniels, who was a white priest who came down, Unitarian priest who came down to Lowndes County to help the workers. You had the death of Viola Luizzo, who was also another Unitarian church member who came down from the north. I'm Facebook friends actually with her son and daughter. She was brutally killed, and her bloodied car was displayed at the state fair with the sign on it saying, "This is what happens when you help niggers." And so,
Really?
Yeah. And so that's what Willie Mukasa Ricks comes in and says that Highway 80 is the bloodiest highway in the country. That's because, you know, the civil rights workers were there, the Klan were there, and it was the main artery into the Black Belt. You had to go through Highway 80 to get to these hotbeds where the civil rights activity was taking place. Tuskegee's along Highway 80, Montgomery's along Highway 80, Hayneville, Lounsboro, Mosses, Selma, you know, all of these places are right along Uniontown, Marion, all of these places are right off Highway 8, either on or right off Highway 80. So naturally, the Klan, the FBI, Black people, socialists, I mean, everybody was traveling along Highway 80 to get a piece of the action. Malcolm X traveled down Highway. I mean, you know, it's just one major issue after another.
You've given us some really good information about Highway 80. Really intrigued. Now, can I come down to Highway 80 now, and are there historical markers and that kind of thing there?
Absolutely. There's several historical markers. As a matter of fact, there are 3 interpretive centers on Highway 80.
Okay.
One is on Alabama State's campus. One is in Lowndes County, and the other's in Selma when you directly come across the bridge.
Okay.
And yeah, there's several historic markers all throughout downtown Montgomery, all throughout the highway, and when you get in Selma itself. So
okay.
Yeah, be prepared to, you know, make a couple of days of it because, you know, we have the Equal Justice Initiative Museum has a lynching memorial there, which, you know, attracts thousands of people every day. You know, then you have Historic Alabama State University, which has several historic markers in and of itself, commemorating the boycott, the other court cases that involved Alabama State, other protests and so forth. So
sure. Now, hold up the book again. How can people get your book?
Sure. You can go to linuslearning.com. Linuslearning.com. Linus.
Linus Learning.
One word. Linuslearning.com.
Okay. All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Strong Inspirations. Thank you, Dr. Robert White, for spending time with us and sharing your knowledge. We're going to come back. We're going to make sure people get copies of that book. Everybody, this is Strong Inspirations. I'm telling you, we're going to give you some strong stuff, some strong, good vibes. Our aim is to inspire, to educate, and to entertain. And also, get a copy of my book, Black Business Book. My website is businessintheblack.net. Brother, thank you again so much. I'll be back at you soon.
Everybody. All right, man. Take care.
Hey, thank you.